The manga starts, and the very first thing that we see is our main female protagonist, Stella, crying to her father, who is gravely ill after he was hurt from a lion hunting accident and broke his hip so badly that the bones literally pierced his organs. He cries that he is about to leave her in a den of lions, where everyone is aggressively fighting for a chance at the succession. He adds that his only regret is that he wasn't able to secure a male heir for the kingdom. As Stella starts to tear up, she cries and apologizes that she was born a woman, and she clenches her fists. Her father reminds her that she is his most treasured possession, one that he knows he can never replace. From the back, two siblings let the king know that he can leave Stella to their care. And as these two demons smile at both father and daughter, Stella, with teary eyes, calls them both out. As the woman gives an absolutely kind smile, we actually learn the hidden intention of these scumbags. They are secretly planning to first eradicate the king and then eradicate his only real daughter. In the end, they can take over the entire kingdom, monopolizing it in the end. Now, their main goal is to kill Stella in the sneakiest way possible. From the side, her sibling lets her know that even though their plan has been working mysteriously well and everything is going according to their plans, he reminds her that Stella is still extremely difficult to kill. After her father died, the process of killing Stella begins at a dining table as the meal was served. Stella starts to eat the food, and the sister-in-law ends up smiling, adding that if a king has recently passed away, then the heirs and the children of that king should be extremely careful of eating any food off the table, and it's a wise decision to always have a poison tester. As they both smile, it seems like we see the real thing that they had done. They added poison in Stella's food. And as she unexpectedly eats the entire plate, she lets them know that she's really thankful for the meal. The sister-in-law is lost after seeing this, and her eyes widen to see this. She sees that Stella has just eaten the poison, but there was absolutely no effect. She was not foaming from her mouth, nor was she sweating, nor was she experiencing a headache or any stomach pain. She starts to be more aggressive towards the maid. She screams on how she didn't add a lot of poison. The food preparer lowers her head and adds that she had actually put twice the dosage in Stella's food, but still it hasn't worked. Now, the sister-in-law is blaming herself for not choosing the right person, and she adds that if the poison food hasn't worked this time, then it will surely work the next time, as she gives out a smirk. The king of the kingdom was buried, and as Stella mourned her father, she is all alone in this world. On the side, one of her loyal companions, the butler, cries on how Stella is all alone and now has to carry the weight of an entire kingdom on her weak and timid shoulders. Clenching his fist, he says that he's going to do his best to support and help her. But as always, her sister-in-law gives out a smirk, and her evil plan is now going to take even darker twists and turns. The very next night, as a few of the soldiers scream about something, it seemed like the butler, who recently showed his determination for Stella, was just killed in his bath. As Stella herself checked it out, she saw that the most loyal butler that Stella ever had was brutally drowned in the bathroom. The same thing started to happen, as one of the night that Stella was given showed up, and after he meets with Stella and lets her know that he's going to serve her with his life and would do anything to protect her. Just as Stella herself finally starts to feel a little bit comfortable about this, the very next day, something even more tragic happened. Ziz, her loyal knight, was devilishly brutally mutilated in the courtroom with his bones, his arms, his torso, all torn up, and in a state that's impossible to describe. Even his face was in pieces, and his organs were all eaten. Stella ended up seeing this horrific and demonizing thing. Poor soul ends up screaming over and over again, and that night she realized that everyone around her is her enemy. To cope up with the entire terrible things that have been happening to her, what she does is she starts to crawl on her back. As she does this grotesque and evil, haunted-like pose, she walks in the corridor, and the knights around her started to comment on how Stella is not normal, and they cried on how Stella is suffering so much mentally that her entire mindset has shifted from being a normal princess to a messed-up soul who now believes in maybe witchcraft or something. The evil sister-in-law, on the other hand, smiles and laughs on how slowly they're going to corner Stella so much that she could even potentially harm herself, and this will be their perfect chance. Now, after a few days, their biggest attempt to kill Stella came, and this time they were going to introduce a demon, a devil who would rampage inside Stella's home. But when they found out that the demon was killed in an unexplainable way, they just looked at the gruesome corpse of the demon and realized that the demon's tail, arm, torso, and its head was cut by a sharp wire that they had never seen or even heard of. From the side, a butler approaches them and adds that the attack and the counter-defense that the person who fought with the devil did was truly remarkable, as the devil was a furious enemy and was agile, very fast, really strong, and could detect anything. He adds that it's a total defeat, Whoever defeated this devil is truly the strongest. As their eyes widen, they added that Stella at that time was in her bed when the noise of attacks came. When people checked, the floor was covered with blood and this dead body was there. Now, the useless princess is somehow avoiding these dangerous deaths over and over again, from poisoning to assaults and attacks. She screams on how Stella is still alive and how she's not fearful of anything. And as we zoom into Stella's face, we actually learn what's happening to her. Now, to perfectly understand how Stella is still alive after her only protector had died is completely beyond normal human capabilities, nor is it usual to see these things. Stella is the host of a lucky fellow, who has helped Stella to survive even the cruelest assassination attempts, and that is all thanks to a small parasite. A few weeks ago, before Stella was even targeted or before her father even went lion hunting, something really strange had happened to Stella. The parasite, on the first day of realizing that he is real and able to move around, noticed that he was in a very dark, warm, and narrow place, which was strangely very comfortable. The parasite also had awareness of his size and length. As he realizes that he is a man and is also strangely in this place, he notes that he can't move like a man and he has a head and a tail. It seemed like there were no limbs, and his body was only long and thin. As we see the terrifying parasite, he can think in human language, but he cannot do anything else. But the parasite is very weak. He can only stay conscious for a number of hours. On day 3, it seemed like the parasite had evolved more, and he started to be more conscious. He could swirl around in the body, and everything in space was strangely comfortable for him. All around him was this energy that sustained his life, and he could also move up and down the entire space. While it was slow, the parasite was living in a living organism that he did not have any idea about. As the parasite moved inside a region, he realized that he made contact with an intestine, and he also realized that there is an exit to something really gross. On day 11, the parasite noted that he is losing his composure every day. Although he's happy that he is alive and he is able to sustain himself, he still feels he's not living like a person that he can live as. He's still a parasitic organism who wants to take over the host that he lives in. He added that he's still small, but he compares himself to being more like a tapeworm or even a roundworm. He has these strange tentacles that can grow out of his body and can act as hands, and he noticed that he can move them around as well. By this time, it had been more than 10 days since the parasite was alive, and he realizes that he is inside a human. Slowly, he moved up and down, and by day 14, the parasite had monitored the entire health of the host and went through every single nerves and blood vessel of the host that he was living inside. The parasite realized that he can monitor the internal organs, the heart, the bloodstream, and also all the flow of information from the human. Now was the time for it to start exploring the other side of the world. So, the parasite snuck out from a rather controversial area. As he brought out his extremely long, slender, and slimy body, the parasite noticed that he had an eye, which was extremely blurry. But when his vision finally got clear, he realized that he was in a luxurious bedroom with a velvety environment, and all he could do was wander around and observe. But when the parasite looked at his host, he realized that his host was a rather young girl that was sleeping soundly. There he realized that he needs to protect himself and then protect this host so they both can live and coexist without perishing. But on day 31, things started to go downhill. The anomaly started to begin really aggressively as the host started to realize that her father, someone that she loved more than anything, was about to pass away. Due to this, her heart rate was extremely high almost all the time, and her body was tensed up. She also had emotional fluctuations that were really scary for the parasite itself. It noticed that the girl was extremely fearful of something, and it was the fear of death. Even though she looked like a stupid and useless princess, deep down, she knew that she was about to get killed, and it was not going to be from any wild animal. She knew that she was about to be silenced forever. His host, Stella, did her best to stay calm, but it seemed like Stella's life was being targeted. On day 33, the worst fear came to life as a plate of food was in front of her. Stella took it, and as Stella swallowed a mouthful of her meal, the parasite immediately sensed something alarming, and it seemed like it was poison. So the parasite started to act quickly. He used the tentacles that he can grow, and he made a makeshift net that was specifically created so it could hold the food that was about to enter her stomach and then avoid her nervous system. It quickly made a net big enough so the entire bite could go inside, and once it happened, the parasite was barely able to hold it. The parasite swelled out and then realized that the bite had a poison that was super strong, way more than the normal dose that was enough to be lethal. It realized that it needed to process it really fast. On day 35, it realized that it needs to move fast as the host it has is being targeted. It started to use its full capacity to now potentially move the human body. Now the only time that the parasite can actually do these things was when Stella was asleep. Stella was a heavy sleeper, so as he started to make it work, it seemed like the parasite had its own anomaly and its own way of thinking and utilizing the human movement. He made Stella like a car and he started to just ride her. On day 40, something really dark happened, and on a dreadful night, a devilish plan of the sister-in-law had just come to live. A winged figure with a horrible face was flying towards Stella's home and perfectly landed there. As the devil entered Stella's bed, it realized that Stella was there and it attacked. But when it realized that Stella wasn't there, from the side, Stella was standing in a handstand and in a really weird stance. The parasite's head was peeking out from her exit, and it was just a weird and unique perspective of the parasite. Without any complaint, the parasite knew that Stella's life was being targeted, and it added that he knew everything and started to make predictions about what was about to happen. As we see Stella's actual position, she was standing completely upside down. As the devil screamed, it launched itself, but a string of tentacles went around the devil's body. In the very next second, the demon was brutally sliced by the parasite. The parasite added on how the whole room was covered with his tentacles, which were so hard and so sharp that they could literally cut anything. Using the feet and hands of Stella, the parasite exerted even more power and started to just take out the demon like an absolute unit. After the devil was killed, the knights outside noticed the noise, and once the knights entered, Stella on the other hand was completely asleep. That's when the message and the entire story took a turn. Now on the other hand, both siblings were crying on how poison wasn't working. Every assassination had failed. They asked how they can actually kill her, and from the side, the brother-in-law added that if things are getting too dark and too difficult, then they can just hire the most ruthless killers on the black market. They added that they can just call out the Black Brigade. Those criminals were extremely violent. They could even wipe out an entire city in just one night. Her brother added that if they're going to war, then they need to be well prepared and go one step ahead to win. As they make a decision, they are going to play this political game to a much higher degree and will do anything to kill Stella so they can make it to the higher seat, no matter what. The next day, as Stella woke up, she stretches, and as she noticed the blood stain on her bed and on the ground, she completely freezes and started to ask what happened last night. As she gets up, she noticed that there was a weird writing on the mirror, and when she checked, she realized that it was written that someone is watching her, and this sent shivers down her spine, and she screams. But the unknown hero, the parasite man, had completely went into a slumber for the time being. The next day, as the sister-in-law adds on how last night was quite an event at her bed, she just quietly smiled and ate her food, but the sister-in-law was going crazy in her mind. She thought that Stella was a true monster. Stella was supposed to be murdered in her bedroom last night but failed. All her attempts to kill Stella are falling apart and she asks if Stella did something to the devil, but with a really cute expression, Stella lets her stupid face know that she was asleep when the entire commotion was happening, and she adds that she has no idea what the sister-in-law is talking about. As she eats more, she quietly stands up and thanks everyone for the food. As she goes out, the sister-in-law checks her plate and notices that her fork was actually twisted, and it was twisted with her own tongue. As she looks at it for a minute, she completely goes into this paranoid stage and starts to ask herself what Stella is and who she really is. In her mind, she's thinking that maybe Stella is secretly trained. As Stella quietly moves with her smug look, she has no worries. Somehow she is more relaxed now than before. The parasite, in the back of his mind, is sure that he needs to be really careful and he needs to make sure that the host lives. But Stella, on the other hand, is stupid, he complains. She doesn't even notice that her food is always mixed with all kinds of poison, and he adds that although he has been able to digest the poison, it's still pretty difficult to deal with it. He adds that he just mixes the poison in her feces as always. As she smiles, the real hard worker behind her smile is the parasite man. As she goes to relax, he really wants to just let the host know that she needs to be careful, and he remarks on how her brain is so relaxed. But he, on the other hand, is doing almost 99% of the work. He adds that he left that fork warning for the sister-in-law on purpose, so she would take the hint. As she walks home, the parasite has been doing his best to get as much external information as he possibly can. When Stella goes to sleep, he quietly takes over her body and studies for days and days in the library. He has almost been able to learn everything and has reached a middle school level by now. Although his earlier actions really spooked Stella a lot, he still believes that he needs to be in a situation where both him and the host are much more united than ever. Although they live in a medieval nation, there is no electricity nor is there any steam engine. Everything is pretty close-minded, and the entire world is a collection of small countries that have combined with each other, and they just basically live in a peaceful place. Stella, on the other hand, is a princess, and after her father died, she's the next in line. As he adds on how her status is really important, that is the reason she's been targeted. Also, this country is a hub of a vastly appreciated currency, which is why almost the entire region uses the same currency that this small kingdom has. Although other nations have their own currency circulation, the bigger financial power is under Stella's kingdom for now. And to Stella's misfortune, this parasite has become an important part of her life now. Although he sneaks out a lot and studies a lot, he has found a rather unique technique to do his jobs. He tried to wander around in the castle like the way he used to do, but it's really creepy and it also attracts a lot of attention. So he figured that he can do something even better, and that's something extremely creepy. The parasite makes Stella walk on the ceiling of the castle, which makes the entire operation more sneaky and better. He uses his mechanism to really do this, as Stella and the host enjoyed few days of peace. It was really time for the bigger team to enter and assassinate Stella. An army of Black Brigade assassins entered into the castle. They come with an evil plan and evil intention to eradicate the entire kingdom and the bloodline. As they entered, they started to dump more and more fuel and gasoline, and as one of the masked figures lights the area, the entire castle erupts into flames. A knight warns Stella. He lets her know that there is a fire in the castle, and as she wakes up and rubs her eyes, she was clearly not ready for it, and it's clear that without the parasite, she would have been long dead. As she opens her eyes wide, she starts to add on how it's a big fire, and she's just not prepared for the group that is looking for her. From the side, someone calls out to her, and the knight grabs her hand, pulling her and exclaiming that she needs to go somewhere safe. As the man leads her to safety, in the very next second, the man's head falls to the ground, and his entire body slumps down, and blood starts to gush from it. Stella, on the other hand, opens her eyes and was not taking anything into account. She just freezes there and lets out a terrifying, long scream. But in the very next second, as she goes unconscious, an attacker brings a big machete and was about to strike her head. But as he was about to do it, in the very next moment, Stella blocks the strike with her pinky finger and her ring finger. As the man gets puzzled, in a flash, Stella opens her mouth, and from her mouth, the parasite man lets him know that he's in no position to defend himself now. As the masked man starts to pour more strength into his strike, he notices that he cannot do anything. Stella and the parasite end up bringing out his tentacles, wrapping them all around the attacker's body. The parasite starts to ask these jokers who sent them, who they are, and how many they are in total. As the man struggles a lot, he was not answering anything, but in the very next moment, the man actually severs his windpipe himself, revealing the fact that they are so well trained that they won't share any information that could lead them to their other group. As the masked attackers fell, they see that these attackers are not even human. In fact, as the parasite starts to realize these things, he gets more tired, and he notices that this body was fighting regardless of being struck again and again. Now he knows that he needs to save Stella and he needs to move beyond the room. But he also can sense that there are professional assassins waiting for Stella outside, and if he rushes, Stella, who is already unconscious, cannot run or do anything, and she is basically good as dead. So he decides to use his hidden technique. He jumps in the very next second, and now the camera shifts to both siblings as they quietly drink tea and notice the commotion going on near their rooms. The brother lets his sister know that the Black Brigades have entered the castle, and today Stella is going to die. As he starts to move his mask, he adds that their actions today are going to determine a lot of things, and a lot of things will happen. As the sister looks outside, she obviously doesn't care about anything, and she has already accepted the fact that she is going to go full on and overtake the kingdom. But in the very next second, the brother attacks his sister, and as blood gushed out, he approaches her and lets her know that she needs to be a victim as well. Since this attack is going to really send waves throughout the nation, they really need to sell the idea that there was another mastermind behind them. He lets his sister know that she's not going to die from this, and as she makes a troubled expression, she falls down from not taking the blow so well. As he walks outside, Stella, on the other hand, had perfectly created her own survival situation. The parasite had helped her so much that she was seemingly fine in an army of Black Brigades holding crossbows and swords that could literally kill her in an instant. As he starts to really analyze the situation, the parasite really was going to win this battle. On the other hand, the brother-in-law runs here and there, and he looks on how a lot of people have started to put out the fire in the castle, and a lot of people are already distracted because of that. But he noticed that the other day the fork accident really pulled her out, so he adds that for precautions, he's going to have a gun with him all the time, and if things go south, he can just take her out on his own. He walks in, and as the Black Brigade search for Stella, they were not able to do anything. On the other hand, the parasite started to lock doors here and there, and since his tentacles were so strong, he started to take out people slowly but surely. He was so fast that not even a professional group of assassins were able to detect it. He first took out 2, then he started to take out 1, and slowly his master plan was working. Although things were making sense and everything was going well, the parasite really did better than anyone could ever imagine. Stella quietly just slept, and the parasite man, on the other hand, used his tentacles, which are in hundreds and thousands, and he just covered the entire area. But he kept asking the masked men who the mastermind is. But on the other hand, the assassins were good, and they were not letting out the identity of the person who hired them. As the parasite took out more men, one of the men escapes, and the parasite, using Stella's body, quickly landed. He noticed that Stella was about to wake, and he starts to freak out. He asks what he can do and adds that maybe he moved the body too much that Stella started to notice, and once Stella opened her eyes, in the very next second, she saw the parasite's eyeball right in front of her mouth. As her eyes widened from shock, she quickly covered her mouth. The parasite, using Stella's vocal cord, started to add that he's not a suspicious thing. He's just using her vocal cords because he doesn't have his own, and he starts to add on how this is an emergency and she needs to understand everything. The parasite started to notice how Stella's heart rate is extremely high and her muscles are tense, but he started to explain everything to her. Now, the parasite obviously had a higher intelligence, and he was much more different than any other organism, and he understood that he was using her body without her consent. But now as she has noticed, maybe this could be his chance to strike a deal for coexistence, and maybe if they both move together, they can really cover more distance and even dodge all the attacks that are right now impossible for him to do on his own. As he added on how maybe he should relax her mind or something, the parasite started to ask if she would be alright if they cooperate a little just to survive. As Stella looks around herself, she noticed there were dozens of men already taken out by the parasite, and she asks if he had done this, and he said yes. She also quickly added that, was he also the one who took out the monster the other night? And as he answered that as well, in the very next second, Stella's eyes widened. She starts to bow to him and she thanked him over and over again, adding that ever since her father died, she had been extremely scared. She added that she knew that she would have died the next day, but she cried that ever since he had decided to help her, it has been less and less scary. She remarks that she had always felt this sense of relief because he was always there for her, and as she smiled, she thanked him and added that she's glad that he was there for her. Now as the parasite's eye widened, he was completely blown away by the fact that she is actually accepting him and also releasing more relaxing chemicals, and her heart rate is back to normal levels. She clearly just smiled and thanked him from the bottom of her heart and added that she's glad that she's not alone anymore. Now as he started to add on how this is actually going better than before, she introduces herself and asks what his name is, and he refuses, adding that parasites like him do not have any name. He adds that, if she wants, she can just call him a shitbug or something. As she starts to make up his name on her own, she asks if she could call him Colon, and he agrees. Now, back to the topic. He adds that her life is in danger, and if she dies, then him as a parasite will also die. So right now, their main priority should be to avoid all problems and all injuries at all costs. Since all her knights and people around her are also gone, this puts them into a more difficult position. As a dog also smells it, in the very next second, the dog opens its mouth and another parasite emerges, and it seemed like there was more than one parasite. A masked muscular man with a dog are next to hunt down Stella and finish their expensive job. Stella, on the other hand, cried on how things are too aggressive. As Colin used her body freely, she was covering a lot of distance in a really short amount of time, and as she slowly starts to tear up because she's not used to it, in the very next second, she's shot straight in her chest. As blood started to pour, Colin realizes that they are losing blood, and the very next moment, the trash brother-in-law adds on how he's shocked to see that Stella is not human. His shot was pretty good. As he starts to run his mouth, Colin completely ignores him and starts to move forward. He knew that he cannot stop right here no matter what, so he used his Spidey walking strategy to quickly get away. That antique muzzleloader was really strong, and if Stella wasn't lucky enough, and if the bullet was more precise, then it would really have killed her. But Colin knew from the day that Stella was starting to be targeted that there could be a possibility of Stella getting shot, so Colin started to use this ultrafine tentacle-woven layer all around her body to really preserve her important organs. In this way, the bullet that just came in right now was stopped mere inches before it could hit and really tear a hole in her internal organs. But in this moment, all Stella and Colin can really do is use the Spidey walk and completely go as fast as possible. As she calls out to Colin, he exclaims that right now their safety is their higher priority and they need to get out and survive until tomorrow. Now their main goal is to hide until the sunrise so maybe reinforcement can come. As they completely hide, the muscular man and the dog man started to investigate the entire place, and using the parasite's power and the dog's smelling and hearing ability, the dog knows that they have found the target, and this actually started to make the dog and the parasite more and more thrilled. On the other hand, Stella and Colin hide in a kitchen, and Stella puts her hand on her chest. She adds that Colin really saved her, and from the side, Colin brings out water and adds that he has put sugar in it, and she really needs to drink it right now. As Stella thanks him, he reminds her that she's literally the master of the entire castle. She, on the other hand, drinks it and adds that it's delicious. Colin really was becoming more like a wingman that's always happy and there for her, and he adds that they need to replenish their energy in case of emergency. Now, Colin asks if Stella remembered the face of the man who shot her. Stella, on the other hand, having no survival sense nor cunningness, just puts her hand on her cheek and adds that she has no idea, and as she apologizes that she has no idea since the man was wearing a mask, she keeps on apologizing. It turns out that Stella is actually much more broken than we have anticipated. Every day, she knows that she was going to be killed, but today was much more scary for her. She adds that every day she goes through the fear of sharing the table with her enemies, and that's the time when Colin adds that Stella has always been eating poison food several times a day. As her eyes open wide, she starts to stutter, and Colin adds that the poison has always been extracted from various plants that are almost impossible to find in their native land. As she realizes that it's real, the threats are severe, and her life is being targeted by more than one person, Colin asks if Stella's own family is trying to kill her or something, and he asks if they should kill her family first to really make it out alive. Since in this condition it's more kill or be killed, it's better that they can swiftly eliminate the entire family first. But Stella, on the other hand, tells him that it's wrong for her to eliminate her own family. Seeing her slumped face, Colin agrees, and as he remarks on how he will not go against her will, Stella was extremely happy. Colin, on the other hand, adds that this is how parasites live. They have to accept what their host is about. From the side, the dog and the muscular man actually spotted Stella, but their location was still not revealed. But as time ticked more and more, it seemed like they were just seconds away from getting found out, and the parasite, using the dog's vocal cord, called out to Stella's name and added that they said she needs to die now. As the feeling of pressure started to really get more and more strong, in the very next second, the parasite from the dog's mouth added that he knows that Stella has a parasite in her as well, and he called out to Colin to have a one-on-one fight, as they were about to fight each other to the death. The parasite in the dog kept using the dog's voice and pressured them more, but as they were about to fight, the dog added that he's not going to hold back anymore. But Colin, on the other hand, was even more analytic. He knew that he was going to fight a form of a dog, and in the end, he is confident, but he still feared that Stella could be hurt if they were put at a disadvantage. Now, the parasite in the dog, on the other hand, notices something, and he makes the dog go into a more crouching position. As he starts to crawl like an absolute maniac, Stella screams on top of her lungs, and the dog parasite on the other hand, somehow knew that Colin was using tentacles as a method to kill him. And as Stella started to run, the dog started to really catch up with the pace, and in the very next second, the dog's speed actually outcompeted Stella's weird and shaky run. The dog actually ends up biting her torso, and she screams. Although the dog's fangs were not able to pierce Stella's organs, it was still enough to send her down, and the dog knew that if he cannot pierce her, then he can slam her to death. So the dog starts to smack her body again, and at this point the dog was using its full bite force, and it started to hurt Stella a lot. Colin, on the other hand, knew that humans cannot beat dogs in a one-on-one combat, and under circumstances where a dog has a firm and good bite on the human. So he figures that if he's fighting a dog, then a dog can be overpowered in numerous ways. So in the very end, since a dog is a dog, he brings out these spices from the sides, and in the very next second, he throws pepper on the dog's nose, which is the most sensitive part of its body. The dog completely goes crazy and starts to clean his nose, whimpering over and over again. Colin added that their sense of smell is too sensitive, and spices are extremely terrible for them. And Colin doesn't stop there. He starts to pour more and more black pepper on it. It was so bad that the dog actually starts to run to the other side, but in that way, he ends up getting tangled up with the tentacles that Colin had placed earlier. As Colin laughed and called him stupid, the parasite in the dog's body as well screamed that the dog is just foolish. As Colin added that he predicted everything, in the very next second, he tore the beast into numerous pieces, and Stella screams as she sees the entire gruesome scene. Right there, the host died in the most painful way, and as the parasite's life started to drain away, he started to crawl outside the body of the dog, struggling to just pass this body. Colin, on the other hand, started to use his fast tentacles to cut off all the remaining lifelines that they have as a species, and in a cold tone, Colin tells the other parasite to remember that if he ever tries to harm Stella again, then he will not be forgiven. As the parasite was draining away, his life crumbling right in front of his eyes, he slowly closes his eyes, but something unexpected happens. From the side, a door opens, and the trash brother-in-law enters with his mouth wide open, and this gives the other parasite a chance. In the very next second, it lunges itself and enters the brother-in-law's body through his head. Quickly, the parasite starts to take over the entire body of the brother-in-law, and as he starts to vomit, he starts to breathe heavily. He ends up tearing from his eyes, the parasite starts to do its job, and the brother-in-law just looks at Stella as if it was her fault or something. But Stella, on the other hand, puts her hand on her mouth as she was not really used to what to do here. As she starts to add that maybe they should help or something, Colin adds that he really doesn't know how they can kill a parasite from someone else's body, since a parasite can literally take over the entire nervous system and can even hide in nerve. He adds that it's impossible to kill. As they slowly starts to leave him, since he was basically useless, they just keep dodging death after death. As they walk out, Stella, with a very happy tone, looks at Colin and thanks him for saving her life again. As she adds on how he has done so much to protect her again and again, he adds that he's more like a comrade to her, and as they both share this more wholesome and warm energy with each other, Colin asks why Stella is so kind to him and also more relaxed. Stella lets him know that her father had always told her to get along with almost anyone, as almost anyone can be useful and is a human in the end. As they walk, they had survived another night of terror and misery, and as she smiles, all that bothered her, all the assassinations, all the terrible people who came out to take her life, were dead, and her enemies, on the other hand, were left in dirt. After that night, it looked like peace was back in the castle, and in that night, there weren't a lot of human casualties, and the only real injury there was the sister-in-law's. Now Stella's life and the entire royal family is kind of in a trance and in a more tough situation. Since both brother and sister are basically fighting for the entire throne, and their main goal is definitely to kill Stella, and in that way their siblings could ascend to the throne, and in this way they can really use their bloodline to the full advantage. But since the assassination attempt is going to go more public this time, they could also be the biggest people to point fingers at. Although there are other kingdoms that are also really smart and would love to take over the country that Stella is in, Stella has Colin, and Colin adds that even though he's a parasite, he knows that if Stella kills almost all the hostile people that she has, her position as a firm queen would be certain, and there would be no problems for her. But as always, he adds that human morals mean nothing to him, but since Stella has more dependable morals and values, he cannot intervene. But he knows that he needs a different strategy, since his host is a timid soul who wouldn't mind hurting herself than hurt others. On the other hand, a group of 3 wise men share a table where they basically talk about useless garbage and how they can take care of more things and maybe really ascend more. As one of the men reminds the 2 of them that Stella might be possessed by a demon, they are literally terrified, and one even adds on how Stella has been walking with all her foot down and basically doing these supernatural things that are just from hell. As they decide and get an idea of some sort, on the other hand, the stupid sister-in-law, who basically got hit for nothing, she sits on her bed, and Stella came to check on her. She added that she got attacked last night and has been recovering a little bit now. Stella, being kind-hearted, just smiled, and they both shared a good time. The brother, on the other hand, has been sick for a long time and has not been able to really get up. He is also experiencing some change in attitudes for the time being. As Stella leaves, the sister-in-law just goes completely into this pissed mode, and also this regretful mode, adding that she paid the Black Brigades a hefty sum of money that was just really expensive. Now, her next plan is much more clever. Since she cannot take out Stella using sneaky, shady things or more secretly, it will be better for her to do this in a more public way now. This time she uses an excuse to bring in an exorcist of some sort, and since the rumor of Stella being possessed by a demon is pretty well known, the sister-in-law used this moment. The 3 other wise men who were discussing Stella the other night were also behind this, and as they brought in a man who despises demons more than anything, they add that this man will not let anything that is other than human go by. As the man senses an ominous energy coming from Stella's home, he adds that he today will surely take down all demons. As they spot Stella doing her normal day-to-day things, 3 guards quickly approach her, and as they beg for her forgiveness, they quickly grab her and they tie her with a rope to a bed. She starts to scream on top of her lungs that this is wrong, but the fat man from the other day added that she needs to get a health checkup and she needs to really prove the fact that she's not possessed by a demon. As the exorcist enters with a threatening aura, it seemed like that Stella is in much bigger trouble than ever. As the fat man added on how he has agreed with the entire house committee and all the people had agreed to have Stella exorcised, the man enters with a cold energy and quickly, he places his hand on Stella's belly and he added on how there is a demon in Stella and he quickly brings out his own tentacles. It seemed like that the creepy exorcist himself was possessed, and he brings out his tentacle to overtake Stella's body. As he started to move his hand more, it started to become even more terrifying for poor Stella, and she starts to mutter out Colin's name over and over again. And as the tentacles move from the man's hand to Stella's mouth, it started to become more and more terrifying for poor Stella, and she was one step closer to basically getting killed. As she screams out aggressively, she quickly sticks up to the roof, screaming to everyone to relax and to be more calm. She starts to scream like a wild person, and as she jumps back down, she completely falls down one more time. As they all bind her one more time, this time they also shut her mouth, and the exorcist added that the demon is much stronger, so he brings out a weird-looking thing and he stabs it inside Stella's stomach, and poor Stella, on the other hand, just looks at him like a bunny. As the man starts to press the weird-looking cone inside her stomach even more, Stella, on the other hand, starts to cry that it hurts, and the man on the other hand, he had no remorse whatsoever. He just covers Stella's mouth, and he started to raise his hand, and he was about to make her drink something, and in the very next second, our favorite parasite, Colin, quickly intervenes, and he blocks the weird item, and he makes contact with the other parasite. As their tentacles both collide with each other, Colin hits so hard that the weird liquid that he was about to give her ends up flying towards the 2 guards, and as the droplets of this liquid hit the guards' eyes in the very next second, they burned so much that they go blind, and they screamed. Turns out that these pieces of trash purposely called a fake exorcist, and they were about to feed Stella acid. Colin knew that they're about to attack Stella one more time, and he now questions if he should just kill every one of them. But what Colin does is he decides to first neutralize this weird exorcist man who has been giving her a hard time, so that's what Colin does. He immediately throws his tentacles inside the weird exorcist man, and as the man completely froze for a minute outside, the exorcist just froze and stood still. And as he starts to make an expression, it seemed like that Colin had done something to him. In the very next second, we see something that's much more unexpected than anything. The exorcist's eyes start to become hazy, and in his conscious state, he sees a muscular man covered in scars, and in front of him stood a more timid and more obese man. As Colin realized that this is his body for some sort of reason, he adds that he's converted into a human, and he looks ahead, and he noticed the priest, and he calls out to the man, asking if he has anything to say to him, and he adds on how he's recklessly trying to attack Stella, and he knows about it. Colin points his finger to the fat man and lets him know that if he tries to challenge him in a combat on any more bigger level, he cannot win no matter what. He adds that his flesh and his body is rotten, and he's unhealthy from top to bottom, and he remarks that the host that he has, Stella, is much more determined and much more nourished than him. Now, he also adds that his body and his skeleton is getting more deformed, and he is basically draining himself. It turned out that the exorcist that came was extremely malnourished, and he was a sick human who was getting weaker and weaker day by day, and Colin tells him that if he attacks Stella, he's going to die. He also gives him a warning that if his host dies, then the parasite himself is going to die as well. But he still looks at him, and he keeps on talking about this diet and how it matters a lot, since in this medieval phase, nutrition was extremely difficult for normal people to afford. Since the exorcist doesn't have the high-end nutritional things that Stella eats on a regular day, as he remarks on this, the priest ends up starting to realize something, and he quickly tries to choke Colin, but he, on the other hand, adds that he is weak and he cannot do anything to him. He adds that he has taken control over his body, and basically he owns him, and he is just an unsightly, foolish human, an unsightly creature who he's trying to do his best. As the priest starts to twitch a lot, he starts to mutter to the guards nearby that a demon has unfortunately invaded his body, and he cries on top of his lungs that he cannot live with a demon inside him. He quickly opens the window, and he just jumps like a crazy maniac as he was trying to fly. As tears started to overflow, in the very next second, we see that the exorcist that came was just a useless piece of garbage who just was there because he was paid a lot. As Stella completely goes beyond, she added on how Colin actually did a really good performance, and Stella, on the other hand, gives the old fat man an order to investigate the underground museum of the church where the priest came from. As the fat man just opens his eyes, on the other hand, Stella started to walk back, adding on how everything worked out. She asked few things, but Colin added that he doesn't want to really intervene with her roles so much. But it turned out that the priest that they had brought was actually the sickest human that they can think about, since that man was basically feeding on other people to really get energy from. He was a sick human with a sick mindset with this sick body, and he was doing sick things to other humans to live. As Colin adds how he's glad that he is with her, she also thanks him, and they walk on, ending another big challenge and a big assassination attempt. Now, a little far from the kingdom of Stella, a big war had broken out, and it seemed like that a man screamed for a prince, and as the prince with an arrogant tone told the soldier to call him general, it seemed like that there was a war of some sort, and another main protagonist, Rodwin, added on how they obviously won because his grace and his mind and his overwhelming aura was enough for the enemy army to kneel down, and from the side, the counselor added on how their army had larger numbers than the other armies. It seemed like that their next plan was to target the kingdom which Stella lived in, and as few men added on how it's not that big. On the other hand, the great prince was sure that it was still a country that shared a border with the central nation. They said more things and shared other facts, and after hearing these things, the arrogant and cunning prince paused for a minute, and he added that it's best that we attack it and take it down right now. As one of the wise men added from the side that they need to really rethink everything, the arrogant prince obviously had his own mind on every part, and they added on how the kingdom of Hill Valley is so important since there are foods that they need to rely on, and Hill Valley can really provide them and can really help them in the long term. So it seemed like that Rodwin is a prince from a neighboring country, a very well-known country, and he is here on a mission to capture as many nations as he possibly can, and Stella's kingdom was just in his way. As he screams, he shouts at them that we need to rise no matter what and eradicate everything that comes into their way. He starts to scream on top of his lungs that the next thing that he is going to capture is the Hill Valley nation. Now as we also get a view on the person that's about to become another enemy of Stella, on the other side in Hill Valley, all the three counselors who tried to cure Princess Stella through an assassination sat in utter silence. They realized that the nearby war is going to bleed into their zone, and soon Hill Valley is going to become a battlefield in which hundreds and thousands will be dying. As they started to discuss about what to do and how this can be avoidable, they start to bring out more ideas, and from the side, the fat golden-haired man from earlier added that they can do something much better, and they can offer Princess Stella to Prince Rodwin, and in that way they can offer a political marriage, and since Stella is younger, obviously he's going to be okay with this. Now from the side, they started to scream on how Rodwin is a sadistic idiot who has a torture table for women in his bedroom. As they start to devise a plan on how this can avoid bloodshed and help a lot of people. They basically decided to sacrifice Stella, and to everyone's surprise, the other two counselors were really troubled at first, but in the end, they had to accept the situation and realized that it was a wise option. As the parasite Colin heard everything, he knew that another challenge was next for Stella, so he gets up and decides to work on a plan to deal with this. Since he doesn't want to get his host tortured, it seemed like he was balancing his thoughts of maybe killing the three counselors and taking over everything, but obviously, he cannot do that. As he goes outside, he brings out his tentacles, and as he decided to swing to the other side, Spider-Woman Stella goes to the other building. As he checks on everything, Colin ends up realizing that Stella was most likely getting assassination plots attempted and planned by the sister-in-law. As he goes to the other trash, the brother-in-law, he realizes that he was waiting for Stella and was also hanging upside down like a bat. It seemed like the parasite that took over his body woke up and called out to him. As they started to introduce themselves, Colin reminded him that he should know his place, and since he lost one time already, he does not want to lose a second time. The brother-in-law parasite, on the other hand, adds that he's the new master of this body. As they both start to interact, both the brother-in-law parasite and Colin end up doing the same conscious trading that they did earlier, and Colin, on the other hand, takes over the brother-in-law's body. Inside, Colin introduces himself and adds on how he's still not used to this, and he tells him that this is the most efficient way that they can communicate. Now, as he travels into this land, he also ends up seeing a few things that he was not supposed to see. There he saw a man who takes out his eyes in a war, and he started to add on how his eyes hurt a lot, and that man was in a battlefield. From there, few things started to happen, and as he starts to bleed more from his eye, from the side, 2 men sneaked up to him and they stabbed him to his death. After he falls down, there was something else that was struggling inside. A tentacle was already in his body. As the 2 men leave the almost dying man and the parasite ends up moving to the other dude, and he had no idea, but from that day onward this same parasite just kept traveling from people to people, avoiding death by narrow step. It even took over insects, to almost anything that he could find. As we see the delinquent parasite, which has taken over the brother-in-law's body, he tells Colin that he's going to kill Colin and Stella no matter what. Now it was a match between the delinquent and Colin, but it seemed like that Colin started to explain to him about how he needs his help in this new political marriage situation and how he needs him to really aid him in this. And if this marriage ends up happening, it could be bad for Stella. But the delinquent was obviously not having it, and he started to add on how he's happy and he hopes that Stella has a creepy old man as her husband. Colin, on the other hand, adds that if Stella marries and dies, and everything else gets arranged, then this country would become a battlefield, and in that way, the host that the delinquent is proud of could also lose his health, and in that way, he would have to move to another host, which will just give him even more trouble. As Colin starts to make more sense, the delinquent actually listens to it, and in the very next second, the connection cuts off, and he moves to the other side, telling him that he pisses him off and he's going to go now. As they both leave each other, Colin knew that Stella is going to face a much bigger problem, and Colin adds that today he learned that there are more people like him in this world. He also learned that a lot of parasites are aiming for positions for people at a more higher level of powers, as if they are trying to control their country, to control higher species at a higher stage, potentially form new diplomatic laws. But this moment is something that he doesn't know, but it's more complex than just surviving. It's more like taking over the entire world at this point. The next day, the sister-in-law added on how Prince Rodwin is coming today, and the marriage proposal was accepted, and Stella is going to become a wife of the infamous trash Rodwin. As she looked at her brother with a smiling and evil expression, she added that finally, Stella is not going to inherit the throne of Hill Valley and would have to leave the country. She added and asked his brother on who is going to become the next king, and as always, her brother adds that she's going to become the queen and the ruler of this land, and as she thanks him, the castle has new visitors. With a dramatic and really expensive entry of the infamous prince, Rodwin finally enters the kingdom, and as he makes a troubled expression, he enters the castle with an attitude that is not kind at all. The fat man from earlier introduces the entire place and adds on how he's more than happy, and Rodwin, on the other hand, just kept insulting the castle and the entire country, adding on how they had to fold in front of him and their misfortune has led them to this now. Stella, on the other hand, was getting dressed, and she had a really smug expression on her face, and she was deep down really nervous, and she was not really aware of the political situation, nor was she really interested in this. Now she had learned many things. Colin himself was pretty much unaware, but he still realizes that Stella is extremely nervous, and with a really sad expression and voice, she added that she wants to make Rodwin like her no matter what. As a butler introduces and calls out for Rodwin, the prince enters, and in a cold voice, he asks who is the sacrificial princess for him. As he looks in front of him, Stella was all dolled up, and she was looking magnificent and had a really innocent expression. She quickly lowers her head and she lets him know that she's happy to meet him, and Rodwin, on the other hand, screams at the old fat man and screamed on how the princess is too young, and he in the very next second started to yell on how he doesn't like torturing younger people. He brings out his sword and added that it's better for her to die. As he brings out his sword, he was about to slice her head off, but in the very next second, Colin intervenes, catches Rodwin's sword with Stella's 2 fingers, and as Stella started to make this extremely angry and extremely threatening expression, Colin asks if she should kill him or something. Rodwin freezes there for a minute. Stella, on the other hand, just completely panics inside her mind. Now, a pin-drop silence surrounds them. Everyone around them just completely widens their eyes, and it was a truly unexpected turn of events and a moment of humiliation. Rodwin, on the other hand, unexpectedly spins around and he screams that he likes Stella, and he goes out, telling them that he's going to stay in this castle for a while. Stella herself couldn't really understand this, if it's all true or something. But Colin asks that he must have a really weird fetish or something, to be humiliated by a girl and then getting drawn to her over it or something like that. As she asks about this, Colin, on the other hand, was wondering if he should kill Rodwin right now. But right now the major problem is that Stella's life is still in danger. Even though he had said some things about her, the problem still lingers. Colin lets her know that they should still wait for an opportunity, and just wait and not act rashly. It would just create a much bigger problem and trouble now. Outside, Rodwin walks and he asks if they saw what had happened earlier, and his subordinate adds on how Rodwin threw a magnificent feint or something like that. But Rodwin, on the other hand, was pretty serious, and he started to add on how the amount of force and the amount of strength that he used was completely not possible for a human to block. He started to retaliate that maybe Stella was a martial artist or a person skilled in fist fighting, but Rodwin explained that it's not humanly possible for that timid girl to be like that. He added that she is undoubtedly a demon or something like that. He started to explain on how there is a mimic demon that is disguised as Stella, and he explains that the real Stella had already died, and the demon is now controlling her body. As he added on how he plans to reveal it, he explained on how there are incidents like this, of demons disguising as human and how they infiltrate kingdoms and then ruin everything. Basically, he shares that this type of events are not a coincidence, and there are cases of people who infiltrate kingdoms but deep down are demons, and they use their supernatural powers to overcome everything, and they can even replace kings at some instance. As he starts to add on how he had just caught a tragedy in Hill Valley, he was sure that he needs to kill it no matter what. But he also wondered if he should capture the demon and then turn him into a weapon for the kingdom. As they question what they can really do, Rodwin walked by and he noticed something that caught his eyes. He sees the sister-in-law, and instantly Rodwin compliments her face and added on how she's a fine woman. He leans over to her and added on how he would love the sister-in-law to visit him to his camp and entertain everyone by shaking her hips and doing something to thrill the soldiers. As he leaves, she immediately looks at her brother and added on how he's a scumbag just like everyone says. They leave and they discuss on how he's the third son of the king of Dragonia, and he's also pretty infamous for his attitude and his ruthlessness and ambitious goals. And now after saying this, she was more happy to learn the fact that Stella was about to get into a marriage with no love, and she's about to marry a sadistic and a messed up human who's going to treat her like absolute garbage. As she says this, the next day, the prince ends up bringing Stella with him to hunt, and secretly, this is all planned by him because he wants to reveal that Stella is actually a demon. He added on how princesses from all around the world love to hunt. As they walk into a forest, they start to talk more, and Rodwin asks if he can call Stella by her real name. As they walk, it seemed like that the delinquent Parasite has talked with his sister the other day, and they have a plan, but it is still unknown. As they walk, this time they noticed that both of them had their own plans going on, and they ended up going to a rather mysterious place. As one of the men added that this is the right place, Rodwin answered that this is close enough, and as they jumped down, this is the best place that they can be at right now, he explains. As Stella looked at the place, it was just a huge manhole which was going down hundreds and hundreds of feet. Rodwin quickly points his gun at Stella, and this completely startles her, and she just opened her eyes wide and she started to question if he's about to shoot her or something, and she added that his jokes are not funny. Rodwin, on the other hand, started to ask if Stella can stop bullets and also heal herself. He told Stella to walk towards the hole, and he stopped calling her Stella and started to call her with her other name, Mimic Demon. He called her that she should right now show her full form, but in the very next second, from the side, the brother-in-law ends up kicking Stella hard, sending her to the big manhole that was down there. As poor Stella starts to fall in the layer, Rodwin, on the other hand, screams on why he had done it, but the brother-in-law clears his throat and lets him know that if he would have waited any longer, then Stella would have killed him instantly. Now the soldiers, on the other hand, they bring out their swords and they started to tell him about the terrible thing that he had done, and Rodwin, on the other hand, he just stood there, and the brother-in-law started to add about how he was right, and if he had pushed the prince inside, then they would be all-out war. It seemed like that the delinquent Parasite and his host had planned something to do with Stella, but it was still unclear. But still, the delinquent Parasite had already had a feud with Colin, and he wanted to do this to him no matter what. So he did, and he realized that it's much more fun this way. He also added on how, if Stella and the prince would have married each other, then Stella would just have been a puppet for the sadistic prince. But it seemed like that the brother-in-law was not having it, and as he noticed that the prince was staring too long at the manhole, he ends up muttering few things over and over again. From the manhole, Colin sends a tentacle, and he wraps it around Rodwin's right leg, and in the very next second, Colin pulls the arrogant prince down into the abyss that he had sent Stella into, and as he screams and shouts, in the very next second, he lands into a pile of bones, which actually hurt him a lot, and as he gets up, C glances ahead and end up seeing Stella. Now she on the other hand look at Rodwin with her extremely scary look, and she lets him know that he is welcome in the underground, and as she reminds him that this place is a monster nest, Colin starts to extend his tentacle outside in order to escape and leave the prince there, but quickly Stella stops him and lets him know that they should help the prince. The prince's eyes widen upon hearing this, but seeing this, the prince doesn't hesitate, and he points his gun, telling her that he's really going to kill her right now, right here. As he was about to shoot, Colin points his gun upwards, and as they both start to get into this heated conversation, Colin reminds Stella that the prince has an antique gun with a muzzleloader that is extremely dangerous, and if they get hit, they can really die. Now, Rodwin was certain that Stella was not human and she is a monster, but as he pointed his gun at her, he added on how he wanted to tame the demon inside her and have it as his soldier. But in the very next second, Colin reminds the prince that they're not alone. From the side, a big scorpion starts disturbing their attention, and the scorpion screams, and as Rodwin shots at it, the thick body of the scorpion was not affected by his bullet. The scorpion ends up tackling him down, and as the scorpion started to attack him more, from above, the soldiers started to notice that the prince was screaming, and they could also see a big scorpion-like figure. So the subordinate of Rodwin did the smart thing, and he told the knights to start shooting since it could be dangerous. And so as they started to shoot, his soldiers started to ask for Rodwin, and he gives them a mirror, adding that if they want to shoot, they need to be careful they don't hit him. He lets his people know that they need to shoot once the mirror stopped reflecting. As they realized that there was a mirror, people above decided waited. He also tells his soldiers to shoot when Rodwin would give them the signal. Now, Rodwin starts to fight this massive scorpion, and as he purposely lowered the scorpion near the mirror that he had placed earlier, he immediately signaled everyone to fire. As we see the humongous body of the scorpion that was attacking, the scorpion was immediately taken down. But as a final blow, the scorpion managed to move its huge arm to attack Rodwin one more time, but Colin, on the other hand, ends up intervening, and he ends up saving his life, and he brings him over to a more shielded place. As both of them see the huge scorpion screaming and then leaving after losing interest, both relaxed a little. As both Stella and Colin started to talk to each other, Prince Rodwin quickly brings out his dagger and he points it at them. But in the very next second, the tentacles wrap around his right arm, and as the prince made a troubled expression, Colin added that he would have completely ripped off his wrist and even his arm. But Stella keeps telling Colin to go easy on him. Stella in the very next second gives him a sword, and she tells the prince to be more careful and adds that he needs a sword to protect himself. As he asks who Stella really is, Colin, on the other hand, asks why Rodwin has been referring to him as a mimic demon again and again, and he starts to explain on how mimic demons are demons who disguise themselves as human and then they cause calamities. As Stella puts her hand on her chest, she screams that she has not been replaced by anyone and she is herself. But in a cold voice, Rodwin asks if she can prove it, and as she freezes for a time, he points his sword at Stella and adds that if she's not a mimic demon, then she's not acting like it. As things start to get more heated, Colin starts to call him a piece of garbage, and things were starting to become more and more serious. But from the side, a man starts to crawl down, and in the very next second, he lands right near both Stella and Rodwin. As the man stands up, and it was Rodwin but he was completely naked, and he just glares at Rodwin, and from the back, Stella ends up screaming after seeing that her supposed fiancé who was completely naked, and as she screams, Colin starts to insult by calling him a mini-wiener. As two bullets fall from the new Rodwin's body, the bullets that he fired at the monster earlier was the same. And as the monster tackles Rodwin, in the very next second, they both tried to fight, but Rodwin ends up slipping, and they both fall into a deeper cliff that literally goes into a much deeper area than this. As Colin tells Stella that they can now go home, Stella asks that maybe they should find Rodwin, but he adds that Rodwin's retainers can rescue him now. Colin also recognizes the mimic demon, and he adds that the person that just attacked Rodwin was actually a mimic demon, and that was its true form, and it mimicked Rodwin completely perfect, and he adds that this is how mimic demons perfectly capture the appearance of a human, and then they can progress. As it was about to be night, there were still no signs of Prince Rodwin, and as the retainers sent a long rope, both the brother-in-law and Princess Stella just stood right next to each other, and as they added on how the prince still hasn't been found, the brother-in-law adds that maybe they should split and go inside. As they wait more, they see that Rodwin, with a smile, comes up and thanks everyone for their sacrifices, and he places his hand on his chest and cries that he is blessed to have good retainers. As everyone's eyes widened, the retainers immediately start to praise him, and he keeps going on how he is happy, and this event, this accident that had happened to him, had made him rethink his past actions, and he adds that he's going to dedicate his country more, and he's going to treat everyone better. As everyone's eyes open even more, they finally saw that their prince, who was arrogant and who was terrible with everyone, got this new personal development. As they saw this, Stella started to ask if this is the real deal, but Rodwin, on the other hand, calls out to Stella, and as he approaches her, he tells Stella that he would like to reconsider their engagement from a clean slate, and as he asks if this would be all right, she agrees, and he tells everyone that now they are going to go back to their beloved empire, and as everyone started to leave, Colin, on the other hand, started to talk more and more about how this is completely different from what Rodwin's real personality is. Colin added that there's a possibility that this is either a mimic or either the real deal. No one really knows if the person that just came out of the lair is the real deal or not. But for the normal people, it's confirmed that Rodwin is much better than before, and no one can prove otherwise. And Colin also adds to Stella that if the death of Rodwin is found by anyone other than them, then it will be extremely difficult as it will be an all-out war. He also looks at Stella and he reminds her that regardless of what happens in Hill Valley, it has nothing to do with him. As a companion, he's going to coexist with her no matter what, and he's going to make sure that both the host and him are safe. As they exit, they leave this topic behind. In the night, the three councilmen talk to each other and added on how they have escaped the military attention and also the forces have withdrawn from the battlefield. As they let out a big sigh of relief, it seemed like that the new prince's order was to withdraw the army and also call off the engagement that they had with Princess Stella. Taking this moment, one of the men also added that no matter what, they should take this chance to put Stella onto the throne and get it over with. But it was obviously met with a lot of other problems, and this topic was still left untreated. On the other hand, the sister-in-law was still healing from her tiny injury that seemed like was going to leave her with a scar, and she screams that if she's going to be the future queen of Hill Valley, she needs to gain more power, and her skin and her flawless beauty should be the top priority of anything. Now, the delinquent Parasite, on the other hand, is the main holder of the brother-in-law's body. Seeing his sister, he realizes everything on how both the brother and sister were brutally killing almost every single descendant, every single family member, to move their position higher and higher, all to ascend further onto the great throne. And it was so ruthlessly and perfectly done that even though everyone can point their fingers at them, no one was daring to do this. This country was slowly being taken over by the two of them, but no one was stupid enough to point at them. Now, the delinquent Parasite was obviously not interested in this, but he was more interested on who will die on Stella's side. Either it's going to be Stella herself or it's going to be people around her. Stella, on the other hand, has completely been relaxed since her engagement has officially been called off. Her former fiancé had moved back with his army, and now she can enjoy a good cup of coffee and enjoy her time with her new friend, Colin. A man was breathing heavily, and as a hand grabs out to the grass nearby, a man comes out, and in the very next second, we see that the real Rodwin is finally out from the dungeon that he was sent to. As he started to realize the grave situation that he was in, he starts to look around and notice that no one is here, and he swore and he cursed on how no one had looked for him. Not even a single soul decided to stay behind for him, and he cries and he promises himself that he's going to execute every single one of them who didn't treat him better. And as he walks, he notices that he's lost in pitch-black darkness, and he starts to swear over and over again. But he noticed from his side that a few branches were starting to twitch, and he noticed and he knew that it was a beast of some sort. So he decided to do the best thing that's possible. He decided to climb up the tree and stay there for a while, so he decided to just become a monkey to basically survive. So as he climbed, he decided to spend his night hanging on a thick branch as he cries on why this is happening to him. He swears that no matter who betrayed him, he's going to kill them, and he's going to never forgive them. The next morning, he gets down from the tree and he makes his way to the nearby village. And as he smiles on how he's outside the forest, he noticed that there were a few clothes, and he makes jokes on how it's pretty terrible, but still he had to get away with this. But as he touched the clothes and he realized that he can take this, from the side, someone calls out, and in the very next second, a man punches him extremely hard and sends him flying to the fence. As a man confronted him for trying to steal his clothes, he started to ready his fist. On the other hand, the real Rodwin started to talk back to him and added on how this is not clothes, this is more like trash. And he immediately goes into this pissed mode, and he gets up and he starts to introduce himself on how he's the Prince of Dragonia and he's the third prince in line. And for the grave thing that he did, for the punch he threw, he screams that once he returns to his home, he's going to send an army and burn down his entire family for treason and assault. Now as he starts to threaten him even more, the man punched him even harder, and this punch was actually more painful. As he spun like a little fish, the man started to add that Rodwin's face is pretty clean and pretty rich, so he added that there's no doubt that he's rich. But Rodwin cried that he's telling them the truth. But in the next second, the man brings out this wooden staff of some sort, and he starts to hit Rodwin's head over and over again, and he adds and he mutters that he needs to kill Rodwin before he gets back to his home and then sends out an army to eradicate his family. He adds that he's going to kill him before he gets his revenge. And as he starts to beat him even more and more, Rodwin, on the other hand, just completely goes off the rails, and he pulls out a fist filled with sand and he throws it towards the old man, and as the man cried out about the pain in his eyes, Rodwin, on the other hand, was completely gone. Rodwin had finally stolen the clothes of the old man, and as he adjusts his jaw from the pain, he cries on how his whole body aches, and he's starving and he's thirsty, and he laughs on how the lower world is truly as terrible as possible. But as he falls down from pure exhaustion and pain, he couldn't get up. But from the side, a timid girl places a water bottle right near him, and as a cute kid tells him to have her water, Rodwin, with an extremely rude behavior, grabs the bottle and he starts to chug the water. But he complains on how there's gravel in the water and cries that it's some muddy water. But in the very next second, the girl brings out her bread, and Rodwin as always snatches it again, and he starts to chug the bread like it's the last thing that he will have. After eating everything, he starts to add on how it's disgusting and it's like a mysterious dumpling, and he brings out his hand and tells her that it tastes like garbage, but he still needs one more. But the girl's eyes were sad, and she tells him in an extremely sad voice that she doesn't really have anything else to give him. She adds that she only gets one, and it was basically her food for this day. Seeing this, Rodwin actually completely becomes serious and he looks at her for a time. And from the back, an old man calls out to the girl, and as the girl completely gets scared, the man starts to complain on how the girl is slacking off from her job, and he starts to call her a useless piece of trash, and she apologizes to her master. He points out to a big wasteland and added that her responsibility was to level the entire ground, and as he starts to shout more at her, he adds that as a punishment, she's not going to have food for 3 days, and all that little girl could do was apologize over and over again. But Rodwin interrupts them, and with a cold and determined voice, he tells the master of that girl that he'll buy that girl right now. As the man looks at Rodwin, Rodwin starts to fight his own thoughts, and as he points out to the girl, he said that he'll buy her and he needs to take his filthy hands off his daughter. As he said this, the man completely flips, and he adds that he's talking like some sort of big shot while wearing shabby clothes, and added on how he doesn't have any money, and if he's underestimating them. But Rodwin tells him that he'll pay him as much money as he wants, but he needs to give him the girl. But from the side, a few other men start to approach Rodwin, and it seemed like that they didn't like his tone of being a rich kid, and some even started to make jokes on how Rodwin could be into these type of things, or might have some sort of fetish or something. But Rodwin actually was pretty serious, and he tells him that if they insult him anymore, then he's going to fight them with everything that he has. As the heated conversation actually started to get even worse, in the very next second, Stella joins in the heated conversation, and she tells them that she's going to pay all of them. This part ends right here. In the next parts, we'll see how Stella realizes that the man that she is with is actually the real Rodwin, and also her fiancé, who doesn't even know that their engagement is being called off. At the table, something extremely strange was going on as Stella and her family were eating breakfast. Her sister-in-law noticed how both her brother-in-law and Stella had been eating in perfect sync. On top of everything, they were chowing down food like it was their last day on Earth. As she remarked on how the good-for-nothing princess was left for her to handle again, she was not pleased. She questioned Stella on what exactly was going on. Deep down, she was pretty frustrated. On the other hand, Stella's brother-in-law was minding his own business. As Stella finished everything like before, she exited the dining area and was surprised by Colin, and as he obviously came out from a rather uncomfortable place, she cried about how it was still too much for her to accept. As he apologized, he asked where else he could come out from and whether he should even make an appearance. As he was saying this from the side, Stella told Colin that she would like to look for Rodwin. As she said this, Colin told her that Rodwin had already returned to Dragonia and there was no reason to look for a person who had already been found. Then she told him that she was talking about the real Rodwin. As Colin became serious, Stella's brother-in-law joined in and added how this entire plan was going to be a bad situation. He started to explain how Rodwin had actually been replaced by a mimic demon, and the mimic demon had already infiltrated Dragonia. He explained how countries which end up getting infected by a mimic demon usually decline at a slow pace, but it is almost certain. As both Colin and the brother-in-law talked for a while, Stella took her brother-in-law and left. As they left, Colin asked if Stella remembered the place they had been. It turned out they were really going to look for the arrogant prince, and since Stella herself was extremely serious, she told Colin that they could not refuse. As Stella packed everything up, she was ready for this adventure. Colin, on the other hand, started to observe the room and found a missing passage. As he opened a door to a rather mysterious and hidden passage, and Stella was obviously quite surprised to see that there was always a hidden passage inside her bedroom. She slowly walked in. A few moments later, Colin led her outside of the castle. Stella exclaimed that she had been living there for years and had no idea such a passage existed. As they both quietly made their way to the place where they found the hole which Rodwin had fallen into, Stella looked down and noticed signs of a struggle and traces of someone who crawled out of the cave. These traces were extremely new. Seeing this, Stella was sure that Rodwin was nearby. Their best course of action was to go to the nearby forest and track down nearby villages. With the hope that Rodwin was alive, the story travels to the present where Stella jumps in front of an injured Rodwin, who had been beaten up by local villagers. As Stella jumped in, Rodwin screamed her name. Immediately, all the villagers turned into gangsters. Their main goal was to gobble up as much money as they possibly could. As Rodwin heard their tone in front of the princess, he asked if those idiots had any idea who she was. As they had no respect, one of the men added that she was indeed the princess. Immediately, Stella reached for something and brought out a beautiful amber necklace. She told everyone she would give them this. Seeing this, one of the villagers examined it and said it was a real red moonstone, which is extremely rare and expensive. One of the villagers added that he'd give the girl to them because of the necklace. But he then told her that even though they had taken valuable items, she needed to leave everything valuable to them, as they became more greedy. From the back, other villagers warned that they should not take the princess lightly. One villager was getting cocky and added how they could rob her right now and no one would know. As he was saying this, something pulled him extremely hard. He was dragged away and immediately hanged from a tree. As Stella changed into a killing machine, she asked Colin what they should do with these people. Seeing this, everyone else brought out their knives and weapons to attack Stella, but Colin immediately dismantled them like an absolute agent. He dragged them and hanged them from a tree. It was a pure sight of dominance. Stella noticed that Colin was able to speak on his own. Colin added how he had been developing extremely fast, to the point that he now had vocal cords. As they both engaged in conversation, Rodwin asked with a serious voice who exactly she was. Since he was already confused and had his own theories on mimic demons living in human bodies, he had a lot of questions that only Stella and Colin could answer. Later that night in the castle, the same girl Rodwin was fighting for was properly dressed up and carrying a meal. As she stepped down the long stairs, she opened the door and cheerfully called out to Rodwin, adding that it was dinner time. Immediately, Rodwin, with his cocky and arrogant tone, screamed at her saying that she should remove those clothes and wear something better. He yelled at her that she had been acting like a servant of Hill Valley Castle and that she should not work under anyone's command. Since she was his purchase, he added that she should be treated well and better than anyone in the castle. The girl knew how kind-hearted Rodwin actually was despite his arrogant exterior. As he asked for food, she smiled and gave it to him. As he ate, he complained like a spoiled brat, but deep down, he was still eating it regardless. The little girl had no idea if the food was good or not, so she asked. Rodwin told her with a confident tone that the food in his country was so delicious it could be branded as the greatest creation of mankind. He started to praise his own country over everything. She smiled and asked if she could have something as well. He agreed and then started a rant on how the wine itself was moldy and disgusting. As she lowered her head, she thanked him, saying that because of Rodwin, she was no longer worthless. Rodwin was not used to this and asked why she was doing that. He called her by her name, Rosalia. She smiled again. It seemed Rodwin had given her a beautiful name that was fit for her personality. After some time, Stella brought one of the key councilmen from their kingdom. As he saw Rodwin sitting and enjoying his meal, his eyes widened and he screamed his name. He told them that Rodwin was the real deal and the one who was sent back to Dragonia was actually a mimic demon. As he listened to the story, the councilman quickly understood how such a scenario was possible. Rodwin complained in his arrogant tone that he would like them to request Dragonia to send retainers to get him. But as the councilman refused, he told Stella that he'd inform those around him to treat Rodwin better. As he started to leave, the councilman was not having Rodwin's attitude and basically told him that he was going to stay there and be treated just like everyone else. Stella was actually more agreeable, but Rodwin, on the other hand, questioned if they were going to use him for political gain or something. The councilman, being clever and cunning, told Rodwin that he was in no situation to ask for favors without giving anything in return. After reminding him of this, the councilman left, adding that this was the best solution for now, they strictly needed to keep his real identity hidden to avoid chaos. Once he left, Rodwin went crazy, adding that Stella was a useless princess for letting her councilmen do everything for her. As he said this, Colin was obviously angry, since Rodwin was insulting his host. However, as Rodwin put down his glass, his voice turned gentle. He told Stella that, despite everything, he was extremely grateful she saved him when he was at his lowest. Stella was stargazed rather than happy. He then made a strange request. He got up and told her he wanted her help to go back to the cave he came from. As she froze for a second, he told her in a firm tone that he wanted to go back to hunt down the other mimic demon, the one who took his image. Both Colin and Stella were stunned by the out-of-this-world request. Without an ounce of hesitation, Colin told Rodwin they were not going to do this. They were not in a position to let Colin's host get into a dangerous situation. As he explained the problems they were already dealing with, they started to debate. Since the mimic demon was a real threat, Rodwin begged, saying he needed to do this to protect his homeland and that royalty must take such risk. Colin told him that if he was so eager, he could dive down once again. Rodwin told Stella he needed her cooperation because she was strong. Stella exclaimed that she was actually weak and only Colin was strong, but Colin's own mind was acting up. He added that he was quite interested in this mimic demon trend and seemed ready to explore it himself. The next day, Stella and her fiancé went to the cave to investigate. Stella was ready for her expedition, and Rodwin was geared up with a long rifle. The brother-in-law was also ready. Since his consciousness was no longer available, the parasite was obviously dealing with his day-to-day life. Stella didn't know how to ride a horse, so she sat behind Rodwin. Though she was embarrassed and nervous, they quietly rode to the area. Despite knowing mimic demons were real, Colin was extremely cautious. He warned that the Rodwin they were with could also be a mimic. If that were the case, they were being led into a perfect trap. Colin checked all sides of the story but concluded the possibility of this Rodwin being a demon was low. When the brother-in-law asked how he knew about the other mimic demon, Rodwin explained that when he was attacked earlier, he caught a glimpse of a mysterious figure dashing into a much deeper level of the cave. The brother-in-law took this as a joke, asking if that was all the proof he had. They reached the great cave. The darkness was enough to send shivers down their spines. Colin decided to take over Stella's body to get things done. As he took control, he jumped, and his tentacles went off as Stella screamed at the top of her lungs. He made a swift landing. Rodwin, not happy about being left behind, was pulled down as well, landing on the same pile of bones that had greeted him before. The great expedition began. Colin noted that their best chance of locating the demon was by following a scent, and for that, they needed a trace of blood. Colin suggested that the spider monster from earlier could be a perfect opportunity, as the mimic demon might be feasting on such monsters. He added that even a DNA sample could help, as mimic demons could be linked to every monster in the cave. They eventually came to a cross-sectional way with 3 paths. The brother-in-law took the middle, Stella and Colin took the left, and Rodwin ended up with the last one, much to his grumpiness. As Stella and Colin explored, Colin analyzed how the mimic demon accessed memories, wondering if they extracted DNA or used another method. Suddenly, a big spider charged at them. From the other side, Rodwin was screaming that he was about to die. Rodwin ran toward them, knowing his only way of surviving was to hang around Stella. Immediately, a scorpion was entangled in several thin wires. Colin wrapped a wire around the scorpion's head and released a burst of force, slicing it into 100 pieces. As the dead body fell, Colin told them they needed to continue. He used webs to climb the wall like Spider-Man. They returned to the intersection, realizing they had walked into a wrong tunnel that led only to monsters. The brother-in-law rejoined them, noting his route was also a dead end. The only route left was the one Rodwin took. Colin suggested they search that path for clues, but Rodwin insisted it was useless and a dead end, claiming he had only found a monster he was scared of. When they insisted on going beyond that point, Rodwin kept saying it was a no-win situation. Colin looked at Rodwin and asked why he was acting like a mimic demon who was scared of something. Rodwin's expression changed from an arrogant prince to an angry man. He asked what the hell Stella was saying. Colin explained his theory. A mimic demon could change into anyone's body with just a drop of blood. He added that they still needed to verify every pavement. Rodwin screamed about how he hated everyone doubting him, suggesting that whoever was pointing fingers was the real mimic. As Colin decided to end the confrontation and move forward, now the brother-in-law took the lead. As they walked, Colin interrogated Rodwin again, asking for his full name. He explained his theory that a mimic demon needs a lot of data to answer such things. He remarked that when the previous Rodwin appeared, it was after several hours, Enough time for memories to be transferred from the unconscious Rodwin to the mimic. Colin concluded that the Rodwin they were talking to was not real. As he said this, the brother-in-law cried out that he was fed up and left. Colin and Rodwin stood there, and the figure started to laugh in a scary manner. Suddenly, Rodwin's face turned into stone and then into pure sand. The clothes folded down, and a pile of sand was all that remained. Stella was blown away while Colin observed, making sure nothing harmed her. As the sand started to gather up again, Colin applied a thick layer of protective tentacles around Stella. He admitted he was scared, noting that since he was dealing with a sand monster, he might not be able to protect her perfectly and might even lose the fight. As the figure merged, a lady appeared. Stella's eyes widened. Colin noted the demon was even capable of generating clothes. The lady spoke, saying it was her first time seeing a rare kind of demon like the one in Stella. On the other hand, the brother-in-law ended up finding the real Rodwin, completely naked and laying on the ground after failing to defeat the mimic demon. Poor Rodwin finally woke up and was given his clothes, as it was the only way to maintain his dignity. As he screamed at the top of his lungs, demanding to know who was going to lose an arm for the disgusting act they had performed on him. As he drew a sword, Stella's brother-in-law mocked him and made fun of his situation. Rodwin was not taking the teasing well at all. Stella then introduced the mimic demon, explaining that the mimic is an organic race made of sand-like particles. Rodwin had no idea what she was talking about. From the side, the delinquent Parasite asked if there was any way to defeat demons like her, listing weaknesses like fire. Colin interrupted to talk about the real stuff, noting that the demon had lost a great deal of energy. He questioned if their power was related to their size, since they take the form of large monsters to survive and develop. It turned out the mimic and her partner had been living inside a giant scorpion. Since Rodwin had killed it, the other half of the demon was forced to leave. She wore a pissed-off expression, adding that she had lost the most important part of her existence. Rodwin quickly realized she had lost her man and told the mimic demon he knew where her husband was, but she would need to come to Dragonia to find him. She found this a valuable proposition and agreed, but with one condition: Stella must accompany them at all times. Stella made a troubled expression, crying out that she wasn't associated with Rodwin or the mimic at all. Colin also refused, stating he had no intention of leaving. He argued that Stella was a princess and could not leave the country without proper notice. As they debated, the status of Stella was too important to be taken lightly. To solve this, the mimic demon moved in a swift second. Before Colin could react, her fingers were covered in blood. She had used a sand-like attack to snatch a few drops of Stella's blood. The mimic demon licked the blood and turned into a pile of sand. A woman's figure emerged, perfectly copying Stella's face and figure. While Colin noted the copy wasn't yet perfect, the plan was set. A dog was also introduced to protect the mimic demon. With the fake Stella staying behind to handle palace duties, the real Stella and Colin were now free to accompany Rodwin and the mimic to Dragonia. Rodwin was having a great time because luck was finally on his side. He planned to use Stella and the mimic demon as pawns to get rid of the enemies troubling him. Meanwhile, the mimic demon transferred some of Stella's memories to her own mind to play the part better. Colin, finding things increasingly troublesome, decided he simply needed to eat more to get his powers up. The next day, as the sun shone brightly, a carriage was arranged for Rodwin. The councilman was worried things were moving too fast, questioning if it was wise to let Rodwin go. The fake Stella smirked and assured the councilman it was the best choice. She would stay in the castle to maintain Stella's position while the real Stella traveled to Dragonia. They were glad to be rid of the nuisance that was Rodwin. As the carriage left, it carried Rodwin, Rosalia, and a hooded figure, the real Stella. Rodwin told everyone that if he regained power, he would have mercy on the people of Hill Valley for their help. Rosalia was blown away by the experience, never having been in a carriage before. Once they were moving, Stella removed her hood. It was her first time leaving the palace where she had lived her whole life. Colin noted her heartbeat was going nuts with a mix of nervousness and excitement. Outside, the demon dog dashed alongside them at an incredibly fast speed. Back at the castle, the mimic Stella was upgrading Stella's reputation. The sister-in-law found it strange that Stella was now high energy, polite, and constantly sneaking out. The mimic even told her sister-in-law she looked beautiful, which was very out of character for the real Stella. After a few days of travel, the great kingdom of Dragonia came into view. The imperial capital was lively with big buildings. Inside the castle, however, things were strange. A mimic demon was still portraying Rodwin, smiling and dashing around. He ran into his brother, Royce, who was not interested in brotherly conversation. He accused Rodwin of trying to take over his territory and rebelling. He screamed that getting a princess from Hill Valley didn't change the fact that he was crossing a line. Things escalated. Royce decided to take the matter to the king, telling Rodwin he would have to prove his innocence by a trial by combat. Realizing the real Rodwin could be a dead man if this continued, the mimic demon decided to attack Royce, but guards stepped in to defend the royal. Meanwhile, the king of Dragonia was planning something fun, noting that if he didn't control the situation, a civil war would break out. That night, the mimic Rodwin was busy posing and flexing in front of a mirror. His butler was frustrated, warning him that a trial by combat was now official and rumors were spreading. The butler explained that as the king grew weaker, two factions were forming. Royce was on the opposite side. The butler warned that it was a mistake to blindly enter the trial. He offered to arrange an executioner, a trained individual 10 times the size of a human with massive muscle power. Suddenly, the mimic demon's appearance vanished into sand. The mimic was ditching the program, leaving a pile of trouble for the real Rodwin to deal with upon his arrival. The carriage stopped at a hotel in a small town. Rodwin complained it was a smelly place compared to his military tents, but Stella was thrilled to be staying in a hotel for the first time. As they settled in, Rosalia tried to convince Stella that Rodwin was a kind person. Colin remained unconvinced, thinking Rodwin was a messed-up individual with weird fetishes. That night, the dog, the other mimic, sneaked into Stella's room through a window. Colin realized the dog was there to provide an extra layer of security. Later, a tipsy Rodwin banged on Stella's door to thank her again for her cooperation, promising she wouldn't suffer once he returned to his empire. Colin wanted to slaughter him for the late-night visit, but Rodwin just shut the door and went to sleep. The next day, as they continued their journey, Colin complained that the quality of their food had declined, which was making him and Stella weaker. Suddenly, 4 bandits blocked their path, demanding a toll. Rodwin was furious, screaming that his army would never loot people and that these men were insulting the name of Dragonia. Before Rodwin could act, the demon dog stepped up. The bandits laughed, and one threatened to shoot the dog in the head. As things were heating up, the bandit wanted to kill the dog. Instead, the dog let out a scream, releasing razor-like waves that sliced the bandits into 100-bit-sized chunks of meat and bones. Rodwin was impressed, immediately thinking about how strong his empire would be if he could control such demons. Colin was disgusted by Rodwin's obsession with power. After burying the bandits, they reached the capital. Large announcements were being made. Prince Rodwin was missing and wanted for treason. The public was gossiping, wondering if their beloved prince was a criminal. Royce was behind it all, planning to take down Rodwin for good. He was confident, as Rodwin was nowhere to be found for days. However, the real Rodwin was only a few hours away from the capital, ready to face whatever was waiting for him. They finally approached the towns near the capital city and stopped to have some food. Rodwin, at the top of his lungs, told Stella how the food here tasted much better than in Hill Valley. Colin, on the other hand, disputed the claim, adding that the nutritional value was basically the same and the only difference was a slight change in spices. Rosalia was so blown away by the taste that she was in a dreamlike state. Meanwhile, local onlookers were glaring at Rodwin and Stella with ill intentions, though the group remained unaware. After they left to continue toward Dragonia, Colin asked if Rodwin knew the 3 men following them from the shop. Rodwin muttered to himself, wondering if they were muggers. He spun around and shouted at them, but immediately, the 3 men knelt down in great respect. They asked if he was General Rodwin. Once he confirmed his identity, one of the men quickly warned him to flee immediately. A search party was actively looking for him, and they were not happy. Rodwin had no idea what was going on. The men explained that he was wanted for treason and was facing a trial by combat. A huge bounty had been placed on his head by royal decree. Realizing the mimic demon had messed up his reputation during his absence, Rodwin burst into anger. However, he looked at Stella and told her he would not change plans. He was a prideful man and would not back down under pressure or threats. A man of the Dragonia family could not sneak away, he added. Though he was arrogant, in this moment he appeared mature and firm in his foundations. Colin reflected that, to the Dragonia family, pride was more important than life itself. Rodwin thanked the 3 men for their warning. They replied that they were mere soldiers who had served in his army and had been treated so well that they wanted to help him despite the chaos in the kingdom. They were even ready to lay down their lives for him. Rodwin screamed that they must not die. Colin noted that while Rodwin could be a pile of trash, his popularity among his soldiers was no joke. Hours later, a search party finally captured Rodwin. As guards led the carriage into town, the people whispered that his escape had been a failure. A crowd gathered, but instead of looking nervous, Rodwin stepped out with total confidence. He greeted everyone, screaming his name and declaring that a member of the Dragonia family would never hide. He shouted that he would prove his innocence through trial by combat, and the crowd went absolutely wild for him. Rosalia remarked on how popular he was, but Colin was not happy. This journey was exposing him and Stella to more situations they could not control. Upon reaching the capital, Stella was amazed by the packed buildings and infrastructure, noting it was far more developed than Hill Valley. Colin noted that despite her nerves, she was actually enjoying the experience. Outside, the demon dog followed the carriage without pause until it froze, noticing something in a dark alley. Inside the castle, Rodwin was greeted by his butler, who was relieved to see the general safe and recognized Princess Stella. Rodwin explained everything, including the infiltration of the mimic demon who had turned into sand. The butler knelt and apologized for not realizing the deception sooner. Rodwin ordered the butler to show Stella and Rosalia to a comfortable place to relax, stating that politics could wait until later. While in their quarters, Colin concluded that Rodwin was in a tight spot with the upcoming trial. He told Stella they should leave the next day and stop associating with this kingdom. Stella agreed. However, Colin noticed the demon dog was gone. The dog was actually following a mysterious man deep into an alley. Once they reached a dead end, the dog attacked. Its nails slashed the man, and sand emerged. It was the mimic demon who had escaped earlier. The mimic cried out that the dog was looking to regain the remaining mass. The dog unleashed a flaming spell, causing massive damage until the mimic gave up. As the sand traveled from the man back to the dog, two figures merged, and the mimic girl from the cave reappeared. She and her partner, who was still using Rodwin's face, started to argue. Despite their national-level powers and killing instincts, they acted like children in empty shells. The male mimic declared he wanted to stay in the kingdom forever rather than return to a dark cave. Back with Rodwin, the butler delivered terrible news. The executioner, who was supposed to fight for Rodwin the next day, had been found dead. A physician confirmed it was a professional assassination using poison. With the executioner dead, Rodwin had no lifeline left. Watching from the roof while controlling Stella's body, Colin listened to the details. Rodwin remained motivated to defeat the opposite faction, but Colin was furious. He didn't want to get involved in dark political assassinations. As Colin dashed back to Stella's room to prepare for their escape, he found the two mimic demons waiting there. They claimed they had something special to share. Colin wasn't interested, but the female mimic, who had lived in Hill Valley, warned him that this conflict involved Stella's home kingdom as well. The next day, a massive crowd gathered in the arena to witness history. Rodwin stood face to face with his older brother, Royce, who had devised the plan to leave Rodwin without a champion. Overlooking them was the king. Royce's sister sat near the king, crying that Rodwin would never commit treason. On the other side sat the head of the opposing faction, a highly influential man. The judge slammed his gavel and called for the contestants. From Royce's side, a super-muscular, blind man covered in scars entered. The crowd went crazy, knowing this berserker had killed over 300 people in cold blood. Then, the judge called for Rodwin's representative. A mysterious figure in ragged clothes and a strange, creepy helmet entered. It was Stella, or rather, Colin controlling Stella's body. The announcer hyped the match, calling the contestant a terrified demon, even though Stella looked 10 times shorter and weaker than her opponent. The crowd laughed at the sight, and even Rodwin smirked. Colin was privately livid, cursing the fact that he had stepped foot in Dragonia, while the real Stella was essentially taking a nap inside her own mind. The night before the match, the mimics had convinced Colin to help. They explained that they wanted to support Rodwin because the Dragonia Empire was planning to invade the region where Hill Valley was located. They revealed that there was a foreign motive to use Stella's political marriage to gain territorial advantages. If Rodwin took power, he could control several nations at once. The mimics admitted they just wanted to be humans with power so their lives would be easier. They also revealed that Prince Royce's subordinates had already attempted to assassinate Stella in Hill Valley that very night. We see a flashback of assassins stabbing the fake Stella in her bed, only for the mimic to open her eyes and complain that her sleep was ruined. Realizing that neither Rodwin nor Stella was safe anywhere, Colin had finally agreed to fight. Back in the present, the crowd continued to laugh at the little executioner. On the other hand, Royce was furious, feeling that Rodwin was embarrassing him. Rodwin told his brother he would win fair and square. As the fight began, the giant assassin was tripped and he falls to the ground, where he found that he couldn't even get up at all. Stella jumped around as if mocking him, but in reality, Colin had wrapped invisible tentacles around the man's body. The crowd realized something was wrong. Stella pulled her fingers, and the man was dragged across the arena. A thin tentacle wrapped around his neck, and Colin twisted his spine, slamming him into the wall with enough force to create a crater. In a display of sheer dominance, Colin walked toward the man in a creepy, comedic fashion that made the audience burst into laughter and terror. Colin began slicing that man and blood covered the arena as the giant's body dropped with a loud thud. The judge dropped the hammer. Prince Rodwin had officially proven his innocence. The crowd began chanting Rodwin's name. Royce was in complete distress and rage. As Rodwin exited, he smirked, remarking that the combination of Stella and Colin was unparalleled. He decided he must keep them on his side to become the strongest of all. As they left, the two mimic demons watched. It turns out they aren't just looking for a normal life, they have a massive plan to infiltrate the entire kingdom. They are masterminds, not innocent children. Colin, still in Stella's body, felt a presence in the crowd similar to his own. He was sure another being like him was present. Now, Stella is stuck with Prince Rodwin. To overcome the final obstacles, Rodwin declared to the world that Stella is his fiancé, blowing her away with the announcement. Their next plan was underway. It would be the two of them versus the entire kingdom.